everybody. It's Tammi Van Hollander. This is my first video of a series of videos that I am doing with three very special guests. We have Dana Weiss, Jillian Kelly Wavering, and Jessica Biles. And this month, this is September, and it is Suicide Awareness Month. And these three amazing women, clinicians, and child book authors came on to join us today with very special books that they have written on helping children cope with suicide loss. And part of them are in the Bibliotherapy Toolbox. The second one, Dana, we did not get in there, but it's such an important book that you're going to be talking about. But first, maybe you guys can just say hello, where you're from, and then we can just get down to just asking some questions and talking a little bit more in depth about your book and how kids and clinicians as well as parents can really help to provide safe spaces, supportive spaces for children. So I'm just going to go, how about, because who I see first, I see Jillian on top. Jillian, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I have a twin sister, and she always goes first because she was born first. So this is exciting. So I am a social worker and registered play therapist supervisor. I've been working in the field of child and family therapy, specifically trauma, grief, and loss, for about 15 years now. I had previously worked in the South Bronx in New York and just had the most incredible experiences with clients there. And now I have a small private practice in Asheville, North Carolina.
Okay, great. How about Jessica?
Yeah, so I'm currently also in a small private practice. I met Jill when we were both in New York. We worked in several mental health clinics together and had some jobs in the field together. I also see children and adolescents. I work with adults too. And most of my clients are in New York and Connecticut and New Jersey. And I feel so grateful to be doing this work.
Awesome. Dana.
I am Dana Weiss. I have a doctorate in expressive therapies. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, a board certified art therapist, and a registered play therapist. I'm in Los Angeles. Most of my career has been here. I have worked in group home settings and psychiatric hospitals for a huge part of my career, kind of supporting on the end of helping someone who has had the abuse, who is in a place where they're thinking about suicide, where they're really struggling with that. And now I'm in private practice and working the lifespan. So I work the lifespan, grief and loss, any kind of family struggles or life changes, things like that. Really, there's a lot. I could probably keep listing things.
A lot. We can talk for hours, Dana.
Yeah, and I'm also a corporate clinical trainer. So the place I used to work at, that was the psychiatric hospital. We have places all over the state. So I got kind of promoted to the corporate team, and I do trainings like this and talk about this all throughout the state and the nation and the world, actually, sometimes. So I love all of this work, as hard as it is.
Yeah, and Dana, thank you for waking up early, especially on your birthday. So I'm happy to see you on your birthday. Dana and I have presented together. We've known each other for a long time. And some of those things may come up when we talk about some of the questions. So Jessica and Jillian, so I found out about their book, My Grief is Like an Ocean. And there it is. So, I mean, first, I'd love to know how the two of you just teamed up on this book and really what was the inspiration behind it?
Yeah, so as I said before, Jill and I met a very, very long time ago. It feels so long ago. We were working as camp counselors with kids who are on the autism spectrum, but that's when we first met. And then we worked at another job together. And ultimately, what started as a professional relationship became a much deeper friendship. We were actually in each other's weddings. And so we ultimately moved to different states. We both opened separate private practices, but we knew we wanted to continue to collaborate in some way and in some capacity together. Jill has written a few children's books. I have to toot your horn. During the pandemic, she wrote this book. It's on Amazon. I didn't get to say goodbye. She's written a couple of chapters in Dr. Crenshaw's book. And so she knew she wanted to continue to write in this therapeutic children's book space. And she asked me if I wanted to collaborate. I was so excited to do it. And so that's kind of where the idea first came from. Both of us have been touched by suicide during the pandemic. We both saw a spike in referrals of kids and families who also had been touched by suicide loss. And because it can be so stigmatized, it's just often something that doesn't get the attention it deserves. And so when choosing a topic for this book we wanted to write together, we really wanted to choose this topic so that more people and more children would have access to it. Dana's book, which I have here also, is another wonderful resource to be able to use. And so, we came together and we decided that this was what we wanted to write about. And we brainstormed for a while and came up with My Grief is Like the Ocean. And we're so happy to be able to contribute to the bibliotherapy space in this way. We both use bibliotherapy a lot in our practices. It just allows for such wonderful narrative work and metaphor work. And, you can really build on what's in the book during future sessions and have play-based interventions and creative-based interventions. And so we were really grateful to be able to work in the bibliotherapy space.
So beautiful. I mean, Jillian, maybe you could tell us a little bit about just the book and the beautiful metaphors of the book that just are so powerful.
Oh, yeah, sure. I think when it comes to suicide loss, oftentimes parents don't know where to start. What do I say? How do I say it? And so our goal was to create this resource that gave developmentally appropriate, honest, and secular language to parents or to any caregiver who's reading that alongside a child, so that what really feels like an impossible conversation can start to feel possible. Mm. And so I think what's really unique about this book is there's a lot of resources out there for families who are grieving, but not really specific to the disenfranchised grief that suicide loss brings, right? The stigma, the shame, the fear around, if I share the truth, will this create copycat behaviors? Mm-hmm. At what age is it appropriate to tell a child? And so we really wanted to dispel a lot of myths and really empower families to have that healing conversation together, to begin those healing conversations. And so the narrative begins with a young boy who has just learned that his father has died by suicide. And we give developmentally appropriate language around what is suicide, depression, and along the narrative of the book, there's also different feelings that come along with these waves of grief, right? There's anger that he died by suicide. There's confusion. There's secondary losses. There's worry that mom's grief, looking a lot like depression, could also mean that she would die. And so there's all of that kind of ocean of feelings, all those waves that come up. And so the mantra of My Grief is Like the Ocean really invites children to be able to name all of these feelings and to have a space for that in the big ocean of grief, and to ride those waves and to know that they're not alone. And we also give various coping skills throughout the book that then can kind of become like life preservers, right, along the way. And so it's a really rich metaphor, but also there's very direct statements that parents can hold on to as they read the book to their child.
So beautiful, so beautiful. And Dana, I mean, Dana started, and how I knew Dana was my obsession with the invisible string. And Dana wrote, Jessica, you have it. You could hold it up, the invisible string.
Yeah, we got the workbook right here, which is a wonderful resource.
So creative. And then, Dana, maybe you could talk about how you teamed up then with Happy Town for Hope in the Wings of Grief. And then you created another spectacular beautiful, creative workbook that goes with Hope in the Wings of Grief, which is something that just every clinician can have, of some just amazing, beautiful healing activities to just expand on all of these children's books and on the work that we do.
Well, thank you so much. Well, it is all Tammi Van Hollander's fault of all of this, that I'm a play therapist, that maybe not I did the Invisible String workbook before I met her, but we did meet because I was asking the self-esteem shop if they knew the Invisible String and if they had heard about the workbook. And all of a sudden I hear from the side, there's a workbook. And that is where we became friends.
Yeah.
I tried to run away at first, but then I'm very glad I didn't. I got a little freaked out because it was my first experience having a fan.
I was a fan. It was New York City at the Expressive Therapy Summit.
Funny. I was on a live stream before I knew it. I was like looking at my friend. I'm like, what is happening? She's like, you wrote a book. Get used to it. I have not had fanfare like that since then. I'll say Tammi is my best fan ever. But we met, and then we were at APT together, Tammi, and we presented together there on the Invisible String. And then Tammi, if you don't know Tammi, everybody listening, she is the most amazing connector I've ever met in my life. Like, she will just connect you to people, but then she will disappear. And you won't know where she went for about 10 minutes because she is off to connect to the next person. And if you're not quick with her, you might lose her. Well, this is one of the people she introduced me to at APT is Happy Town. And they do a lot of work around grief and loss. And so I'm just standing at their booth with them, just kind of talking with them, just kind of like sharing. They're talking about their work. I'm talking about mine. And we somehow agreed to meet after the conference. They're like, we love hearing from, experts in the field, people who specialize in grief and loss. And I'm like, well, I don't know if I specialize. And they're like, from everything you said, you do, we'll talk, both my personal experience and my career. And so we had a conversation maybe a couple months after, and we were just chatting. And we were chatting about grief and loss and Happy Town and I. So it's Stacy Lamb and Brent, her husband. And so we were talking. Stacy Lamb is our illustrator, amazing illustrator. And we were talking, and I say Brent was kind of on the side because I think Stacy and I kind of got reeling together. And I was like, where there's kind of similar to what you were both saying, where there's really a gap in the work around grief and loss. Like, there's so many beautiful books. There's so many great resources, but people don't really talk about suicide loss enough because it's hard to, and they definitely don't talk about it enough with children. And I was like, and that's when we started doing research. That's when we found your book, which is so amazing. It was such a great resource for us along the way. Unfortunately for children, we could probably buy all the books really quickly. There wasn't a ton of resources that specifically address this. And so we were like, well, that's it. And I talked about how I hold the hope for my clients. Like, I have worked for years with people who didn't want to be in this world anymore. Like, they wanted to leave it. And I have been on that side for so many years of sitting with people and kind of forcing them to stay with us. And working it through them and sitting with them in that pain and experiencing that part. And I felt like I had a lot I could share with people on the other side of that maybe didn't have that honor of really seeing why this felt like the only way for them. And all the pain and the suffering they were experiencing. And so trying to kind of balance all of that together, that work, helping people get through that, not being able to help people get through that, helping families on the other side, kind of working with all that. And then Stacy, talked about this character Hope, which is the koala in our character. That's the one that helps Ori, who's the brother. His brother dies by suicide. Hope was her character, and she had held on to this character for like 20 years and didn't know the place for it. And just with my story about holding the hope for people when they can't have it, and just having to always make sure I keep that, and her kind of hope character, it just happened.
I think of just Hope, and this character really does just come alive, of this little koala bear who's just there in a little balloon, and no matter what's happening, and Hope just says, I'm here. and this beautiful connectedness. And I just love that. I love the metaphor that, of my grief is like an ocean and the waves. And I had some different interventions within there. But, I'd love, maybe before even we do maybe even Dana from your book, or if you guys have a specific prompt or intervention in terms of what can be done there. I think it's really important in terms of this video is that there are so many misconceptions about suicide, the language of suicide. It was a group of therapists who are all talking, and all of them were talking about their client that committed suicide. And I said, well, the language has changed now. And Dana, in your book, and I think in all of your books, but you really talk about the importance of, if we're going to talk about this topic, let's use the right vocabulary. Let's create a safe, healing space, and to be able to speak this language and understand this language. So, I mean, whoever would really want to just kind of jump on, whether it's the language or just misconceptions and takeaways that you really think are important for, those listening.
Let me jump in just because I also want to shout out Scott Emmons, who wrote Hope in the Winds of Grief, the children's book. He wrote it with us, kind of collaborating with him and making sure, just what you're saying, like the language was where it needed to be. Like, are we using the right language? And then I want to be really clear too, that we had adults, teenagers, and children also reading the book at the same time to double check ourselves. People who had experienced losing a loved one, people who hadn't, that maybe we were wondering, like, how did this language resonate with them? And then Catherine Melton, who helped me write the workbook, is also an expert in this. She also works in this all the time. She's in Kansas City. Most of them are in Kansas City. I was in LA. It's a very interesting collaboration. I'm sure you both know, being so far away and writing something together. But it was interesting because I feel like in the year that we were writing this book, language changed within that. And I think in our page in here that has the language, on the very top, it was continue to check this with your loved one, friends, and resources, because this changes all the time. So I think the one thing I would say is just, especially just now in our day and age, language is constantly changing, and we just have to really, one, be mindful and keep ourselves open to learning, but then also being kind of kind and patient with people that haven't caught on yet, right? Because there is no way to know everything you're supposed to know. And so that balance of, how do I call people in and educate them, maybe privately, and then if they keep getting it wrong, maybe do a bit of calling out, which is more kind of in public or in front, but like calling people in a lot more of saying like, hey, this language has really changed and this is why. And I think that's another piece that sometimes people don't always add, is like, why has it changed? Like, why have we shifted? And what does it mean? So I just wanted to shout out those people and jump in really quick to share that. And
I think it's really important, especially if the language has changed. And if, although those who are unaware of it and they're talking about a very a very emotional subject, and it's not really a time to be like, oh, you're saying it wrong, right? Like it's
right.
Like, how do we hold safe spaces, and how are we compassionate? I mean, maybe
I hear you too saying it's a difference if I'm sharing my own experience of loss and like, am I supposed to be corrected in that moment, versus someone else is talking about it that maybe hasn't experienced it or is talking about someone else, and where are those spaces.
Does anybody want to just touch on, because, for years, really the term was committed suicide, not died by suicide. Does anybody want to just like mention how that shifted over time and really what's the reason behind it? Because I think it's important to know why are we changing the language?
Yeah, well, I think when we were writing our narrative, we were really intentional about using secular language and kind of not using some of the language around committed, as in committed a sin, right? Committed suicide, committed a sin. And so that was really intentional for us to be able to give clinically guided, really honest language that didn't have that flavor of shame or stigma or all the stuff that put suicide loss into the shadows. And I think I really appreciate what Dana said about having compassion for people who might still be behind the times and using that language, because I do think that what our hope for this book is, right, whether it's being read by a surviving parent to their child, by a teacher, by a family member, by a neighbor, is that there's not this fear of, oh, I don't want to say the wrong thing, right? So let me just say nothing at all. It's more of like, we need children to know that they're not alone in their grief. And if these words, if these ideas, if these potential scripts or sentences are going to get you out of that fear zone, to connect with the child, to say, I may not know what you need. I may say the wrong thing, but I want you to know that I'm here for you and that you're not alone. And, I think an intervention that maybe like perhaps the most indirect of all interventions, right, is the very existence of these books. I have a big bookshelf in my office, right? Lots of bibliotherapy. And when a child walks in and I catch their eyes reading the title of that book, of our book about suicide loss, of Dana's book about the hope and the wings of grief, it's really that they know that there's other kids. Like the fact that these books exist means that they are not alone in this very specific and isolating form of grief. And that, before even opening up the book, I think is such a powerful intervention where they know that there's like this indirect, invisible community that they can start with.
That's exactly right. And I think so many families who are gravitating to books like this, they didn't plan for this. This wasn't something a conversation they expected to have with the child who's in their care. And so I think, the other intervention, as Jillian just mentioned, is just having these books as a resource while they're going through their own complicated grief experience. I mean, that's an unimaginable thing to ask a caregiver to have to read and have to do and have to talk about with the child in their care. And so being able to access this in those moments that can be so difficult and so trying, and be able to get this child-friendly language just by reading through the book and open up these conversations, it's just so important.
Yeah, I mean, it's so beautiful. And of course, as in bibliotherapy and just like play therapy, right, that it is creating this safe psychological distance. It is a bonding experience when there are no words. You've created the words for the parent to be able to share with the child. That there are so many books that children's books that I will just give to the parents. Mm-hmm. So they first feel heard and understood and regulated. Like a lot of bibliotherapy, we're always talking about it being psychoeducational and really this, top-down approach. And really, I believe that these type of books, and when we're creating play and we're creating this beautiful attunement, engaging experience together of connection, they truly are bottom-up approaches that then are creating that beautiful sense of safety to then be able to take in the words. But it's the metaphors and the imagery and all these other parts that also just create just such a beautiful space to be able to use books when there really are no words. Okay, good stuff. Any other, we talked about but other takeaways, like other misconceptions, or, if there is just one thing that you really want people to take away from today or take away from your book that you think would be really helpful for parents, for clinicians, for anyone working with children who are affected by suicide loss. And
I can say about the workbook, which is exactly what we were talking about here. When we were doing this workbook and we were thinking about it and we were writing it, I don't know if it was intentional at first, but now I think as we're talking, maybe it was. We created activities that the child really can't do alone. Like they have to have a lot of them, the younger they are, maybe teenagers and adults can do it alone, but the younger they are, like, they really need the support of the parent. And what we are also thinking, which is also a misconception, is that like the adults are fine and the adults are not fine. Like, we are struggling just as much. I mean, I can think through all of my losses, specifically ones, you know, where I lost people to suicide, and I still have questions. I still have everything I put in this book about, like, you know, we have the questioning phase, which is what we call it, where it's like, should I have done? Would I have done? Could I have done? Like, how did I not know? I'm literally in this field, you know, how did I miss it? And we kind of created it where you're having to do that bottom up approach. You're having to do these interventions or activities with the child. So whether you're the parent, the caregiver, the aunt or uncle who now has them in their care, the foster parent, adoptive parent, or the therapist, you're really doing it with them. And we did a lot of the books, you know, a lot of this book, I mean, I practiced every single activity, and I didn't have enough people in my practice that had experienced this type of loss. That, I mean, I have kids that love slime. So I'm like, how about edible slime? What do you think about that? Let's try all the different ways we can do that. And they got to rate like what worked and didn't work. And some did not work at all. And some were amazing. And it was so much fun because then they'd invite the parent in and the parent's doing it with them. And I think kind of where I started with that is this helps the healing for that parent too, that may not have the space or may not think they should have the space or may think they should be fine, to maybe do some of that healing without even realizing they're doing it. Like, kind of talking about the metaphor, like that was really when we thought about this book, and we thought about, we wanted it to be things that could be collaborative, but then some that could be done kind of on your own, in your own space if you needed that.
This idea of connection, I think, is so key, because grieving is just can be such a lonely experience. And then this specific type of grief can be even lonelier, because I do think a lot of families, you know, they try to hide it. They choose not to talk about it for so many reasons. And then it can become this really big secret that can feel so isolating. And so in books like your workbook and the strategies that we have in our book, it really addresses that and allows families and you know, children and their therapist, and children and, you know, someone else in their life who's important, to have these connected experiences that really help us out of, you know, help us work through a loss.
Absolutely.
I like that. And the difference between privacy and secrecy. It's okay not to tell everyone your story and to hold it, but what happens is secrecy, right? We're not allowed to tell anyone, versus who do we tell? Who deserves to hear our story? Versus keeping it and it's shameful, right? No, I'm in control of who I get to tell about this.
And actually that makes me think of, you know, one thing that we address in our book, the secondary experiences that a lot of kids unfortunately have when people find out through the news or through other sources that they maybe didn't want to find out, like bullying, like self-blame. It can just add so much more complication to what is already such a difficult time. And so one thing that we really tried to do in our book is provide strategies for how to deal with those real issues that unfortunately do show up after, and can show up afterwards.
Yeah.
Would either of you, Jillian or Jessica, want to maybe share one of the strategies? But you guys all have to get the book to hear the rest of the strategies. A takeaway of one of the strategies. Would that be helpful?
Sure. Would you like us to read it from the book?
Oh, sure.
Okay. Jesse, I'm thinking of, or Jessica, I'm thinking of the balloon, or the
underwater.
Yes. Let me go to it. Let's see. Okay. Here it is, right here. I used to get scared that if I let my feelings out, they would drown me. But my therapist once told me that pushing my feelings down was like holding a beach ball underwater. The water may seem calm on top, but holding the ball can get very tiring. So I learned ways to slowly let the ball go. It felt better knowing I could control how it came up. At first, I didn't want to let go of the ball and tell my friends what had happened. I didn't think they'd understand. But my mom reminded me that true friendship means being there for someone during the hardest times. So I chose my close friends and I told them what happened. They didn't know what to say at first, but they hugged me and I felt better in the silence.
So beautiful. So beautiful. Dana, in your book of all your amazing stuff, any favorite one that you want to share? There's so much. We didn't prepare for this one. This was a
Okay, I'll share one of the pages which was inspired by you, since we're on your call.
Oh, I know what it's gonna be.
Do you?
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Well, it's also one of my favorite layouts as well. Okay, there's two. I'm gonna have to show two, but I won't talk about them. Where is it? Oh, so this layout is like one of my favorite layouts of the whole book. And it's really, we put it kind of under that shock section. So we everything is like anger, shock, questioning, and then we have activities that can really go for anything, but go through each one. And I love this page because I've used this as a resource for families and for anxiety, for anything, but it's the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which a lot of people do. Trying to find our camera, but we use the characters from the story, which is so amazing. And then we have a cold water splash, and then we have a mindful walk in nature. And we talk about a few different ways, and just thinking about, kind of similar to yours, how just those simple moments, the silence, like just allowing yourself to like be in that present moment again with grief and loss is so important. And even if it was just one moment in the day, that's one more moment than I had before. And just having that moment of centering and coming back to myself. And so that's one of my favorites. And then my dad is a neuroscientist, and we have a lot of kind of like STEM-based activities in here. And so he's like, well, there has to be a brain. So we did a What's Happening in My Brain page, which is so much fun. That's in honor of my father, the Reverend Dr. James Michael Weiss. And then we also had Where Do I Feel My Grief? And our illustrator, Stacy, did this gorgeous picture of Ori with like all his different body parts. And so those are probably 3 of my favorites. One, because I did not think Stacy was going to say yes to me. And I was like, how do I do this? Because I am an artist, but I'm not an illustrator, totally different crafts. And I was like, how do I get this if she says no? But she loved the idea and immediately went to work, which is awesome. So just all these different ways. And we were super inspired by your book. It's referenced in the back. We talk about like reading a whole bunch of different children's books and other ways of like language of how to talk about it before you talk to them. Our book is more metaphor based. We stayed in the metaphor. We didn't have a therapist write it. We did find that every other book written for suicide loss was written by a therapist. And so we wanted a book that wasn't, with the supplemental work on the side, just so there's more options. And we loved what everyone had already done of how they use their book to really share the story and have the language. So we wanted to offer something a little different.
Yeah, it's so great. I'm wondering, and maybe you guys have spoken on it a little bit, but what do you think, is the biggest misconception about suicide loss? It's a big question, I know.
I think it still comes up a lot that it's selfish. A lot. And I think that comes from sitting with people for so long that are on that side of like, I don't see another way. And like, I just can't live with, like, I remember sitting with a kid who was 16 years old and had been abused since maybe the age of 2. And they just looked at me and said, would you want to go through your whole life like this? I'm only 16. I can't get this out of my head. And I was just like, wow, like that really opened up, those experiences opened up my mind in such a different way to say, like, that's not what this is. Like, they feel a burden to themselves. They feel a burden to the world. Like, they are actually trying to not be selfish in doing this act that feels so selfish on the other side of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think there's also a very common misconception that speaking about it will cause it to happen. And, one thing that we were really trying to address in our book is that speaking about it actually typically does the opposite, right? It allows for this connection that we're talking about. It allows for someone to seek out and get help. And so it is so important to ask and to open the conversation, not to close down the conversation and try to avoid. Although I understand why people would make that assumption, it usually doesn't actually help. It leads to the opposite of what we're trying to do.
Right. And it often undermines a child's trust
Yes.
in that surviving caregiver, right? Who they are now seeking their daily care from, is to know that there's this secret that's been hidden for them for however long. And just especially with access to social media and to the internet, kids have their phones or they're always checking things. We've seen in our own practices that children will find out from a random source of the truth of what happened. And what that then does, these secondary losses and the relationships that are here in their present, can be so incredibly painful that it feels like they're reopening their grief years later. And so I think it's really about kind of dispelling these myths around, there being this magical age that a child is all of a sudden equipped to hear the truth. And even just putting that kind of that fuel behind it, that, there has to be like the truth about this is different than the truth about something else. It's just about being genuine and in connection with children and say, hey, I trust you, you trust me. Let's work on this together. Let's process this together, is so incredibly healing for the relationships that they'll have for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely. And it can create this additional burden on the caregiver who have to continue to hide, right? Think about the distance that creates in a relationship if you are always trying to hide something from the child who's in your care. Being open and using this sort of child-friendly language to talk to children about what feels impossible to talk about at an early age is so helpful in, creating that closeness.
Well, I agree with that. And that also stunts your own healing, right? Because if you're having to hide, you can't fully heal. And if you don't fully heal, your child can't heal, right? Like there's so much work around that, is that the children will hold their grief if they think the caregivers aren't in a safe place. And so then everyone's grief is kind of stunted around this secret and this like fear and this shame. And, while some healing may happen, you're not able to get that full experience. And then, like you said, then you're having more losses as you age and as you find things out. And
And
I love that you're no, that's okay. But I love that you brought up this idea of secrets, because this isn't just with suicide loss. As clinicians, we see it all the time of parents holding secrets, and kids have all like behavioral challenges, all these different things. And they're like, well, what's going on? And it's not until you go through like the social and developmental history and you're digging through it and you find out these huge secrets that are being held, because the kids know.
That's exactly it. They do. They're so intuitive. They pick it up. It's in the air, even if it's not said. They know.
So these books are so huge, because it's like the parents don't want to hold the secret, but they're so afraid and they don't know what to do with it. And these books are like the remedy to it. Like, I have a book now. I have the language. I have the space, and to be able to do it. So I think it's really important. I think it's so important for us as clinicians, whether we personally have been affected by loved ones who have died by suicide, or we have been affected with clients who have died by suicide, whose families have, and like they're triggering to us. I mean, those are the type of the cases that I have had that have been on this topic, and those kids who have been affected, like it goes deep and it's triggering for me the second that next client comes in, and I'm back there and I'm back in my own trauma of holding it. And back at those times, I actually didn't have those books. And I think that would have helped me as well. But I think it's so important, we're all affected, and this is deep work, and that we just have to take care of ourselves so we could take care of others, because we hold trauma in our body. We can't just ignore it and do this work every day without practicing our just our own self-care, to be able to nurture ourselves, to be able to nurture others. And I think what's so beautiful in terms of our community and our colleagues that, Jillian and, and Jess, I love how like you have this whole history and all this, but Dana and I have a history now that we've all met. We all have this history of just launching this very first, stream or video, we can call it that.
Well, I feel like I have a history of them before even this call. When I got so excited when you said we are going to do it together, I was like, they're in my book. I was like, I love it.
Yeah,
we felt the same
part of my research. They were part of
these books already. Yeah,
extensive research, and they were definitely a huge part of my research.
I mean, it's such good stuff. I could talk to you all forever, and maybe we'll have to like do another one, like if we have questions coming in, but in general, I'll write something so people can find you too. But how people can find you, where can people purchase the books?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Who wants to start? Jillian, I'll let you start. I know it's hard. No one wants to speak over.
You can find me in Asheville, North Carolina. I'm usually hiking on the trails with my 5-year-old and 1-year-old. We're making mud pies. So the book is available in most places where books are sold. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target. Loving Healing Press is the publisher. We also have a website, mygriefisliketheocean.com, where you can leave messages and also order in bulk from the publisher if you're a school or a clinic. You can find me personally on Instagram, Jillian Kelly Wavering, and I post professional things and also cute photos of my kids. If you guys like to see. And also I have a website, AshevilleChildTherapy.com, where I have a blog in different areas and links to some other children's books that I've also written on the topic of grief and loss.
Awesome. Jessica.
You can find me at jessicabilestherapy.com. I am actually about to be off the map. I have a toddler, but I am due to have a baby in 2 or 3 weeks at this point, which is why I'm kind of out of breath. So I'll be off the map for a little bit and then I'll resurface again. And I'm very excited to continue the clinical care that I'm doing.
So awesome. Dana.
The Invisible String and the Invisible String workbook, along with all of Patrice's other books, who I co-wrote the workbook with, are pretty much anywhere you can find books. Currently, Hope in the Winds of Grief, the book and the workbook, are both on Amazon. We self-published because we had 5 of us on the project together, and that just made the most sense for us. I love traditional publishing, but having self-publishing options is great. So currently we're on Amazon. We also have a website, Hope in the Winds of Grief. Hope has her own page. And I'm Dana Weiss. PhD.com, I believe, is my website. I don't use it often. I'm going to be upgrading it soon with the new books. And on Instagram, Blue Girl Art. And I think there's a couple of them, but you can see me, Dana Weiss, and I'm in Los Angeles. You can often find me here or traveling around.
Awesome. And also a shout out that I know Self-Esteem Shop has some, as well as Play Therapy Supply Bay. I always like to do shout outs for all our play therapy vendors too. Well, let's end with just everybody holding up their books that they have. And here are all of our books of the importance of bibliotherapy, creating safe spaces, creating connections, creating that safe psychological distance. And like, we're healers, books are healers. I always say books are our co-regulators when we need to be co-regulated. When trauma comes in, we need some type of co-regulation, whether it's sand and play and art and books. And I'm just so honored to have you guys. You have no idea. And like, it's such an important topic, and I just think it's going to be so helpful to so many people. So I just am so grateful for you guys to be on here, and maybe we'll do it again. Everybody's
I
next.
think we should. We need all my team on a call too. I'd love to be able to give them space to talk. I think it would be too many for this. I think this was a perfect number.
Awesome. Okay, everybody. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for having us.
Check out these books.